Here is a sample MMI scenario station, an expert response, and tips on how to tackle your upcoming MMI. Before we jump into our scenario question, I just want to quickly reiterate what an MMI is. So an MMI stands for multiple mini interviews, and it's very common for medical school admissions nowadays. The MMI is a situational judgment test and typically consists of 8 to 12 stations, including 1 or 2 rest stations. It allows different interviewers to assess you and your reaction to different question types and scenarios based on real-life situations. Your interviewers may be practicing professionals, faculty members, senior students, or even members of the public. The exact timing will vary from program to program, but each station is about 8 minutes long. MMI interviewers are instructed to score each applicant on the following items relative to the other candidates that they see that day: communication skills, strength of arguments displayed, and suitability for the profession. Before you enter the room, which may be a real interview room or a virtual one, you'll have anywhere between 1 to 2 minutes to read a prompt and formulate a response to it. A buzzer will go off when your thinking time is up, and that is when it is your time to enter the room. Depending on the program, you'll have anywhere between 4 to 8 minutes to respond to the prompt while in the interview room. Another buzzer will go off indicating that you are out of time. You will leave the room and you will continue this process until all stations are complete. MMIs will have various question types such as personal, scenario, policy, task-based or collaborative stations, and even acting stations. As I mentioned earlier, today we will be going through a scenario question. Here is an example of a type of scenario question that you may come across during your multiple mini interview. A 12-year-old boy is diagnosed with a terminal illness. He asked the doctor about his prognosis. His parents requested that the doctor not tell him the bad news. What should you do as the physician in this situation? Now, before I read you an expert response to this exact scenario type question, we first want to point out, why is this a scenario question? Why do we know that it's a scenario question? This is because it is putting you in a hypothetical situation and asking you how you would respond to it. This is how we are able to identify a scenario type question. We do have a recommended structure for tackling these question types. It's very important that you internalize these structures because you'll only have about 1 to 2 minutes to formulate a response. Having these structures known ahead of time will help you quickly articulate a strong response. Before even beginning to formulate your response, you want to reread the prompt to ensure you understand your role in the type of scenario. Are you in an ethical dilemma? Is this conflict resolution? Perhaps professional boundaries? This will help you identify the parties involved, as well as identify the themes to properly give a response. You always want to remain non-judgmental and don't make assumptions. So in this case, just a reminder, you are the physician in this prompt. So that is the hypothetical person you are responding to in this situation. Next, for the answer structure itself, the first thing you want to do in your response is identify the most pressing issue. This is typically ensuring the well-being of the vulnerable party. So you want to do this right at the beginning of your answer to show the interviewer that you know who the priority is in this scenario. The next thing you want to do is gather information. As you'll notice from most scenario prompts, they can be quite brief and don't always give you the full picture. You want to gather information through private conversations to find those missing puzzle pieces and in order to get the full picture prior to giving your proposed solutions. It's very important to do this prior to giving any solutions to show that you are not jumping to any conclusions. Next, and the final and most important part, are your proposed solutions. So we recommend that you give these solutions using our if-then sentence structure. So outline 2 to 3 possible outcomes, starting with best case scenario to show that you are not being judgmental and assuming the worst, and moving to worst case. For each, you want to propose the most rational and ethical solution that causes the least amount of harm to parties involved. You want to do all of this using our if-then structure. If I determine this, then I will do this. That is what your solution should sound like. Now that we know how to approach this question type, let me read you an example of an expert response to the question. Let me quickly reiterate the question for you. A 12-year-old boy is diagnosed with a terminal illness. He asked the doctor about his prognosis. His parents requested the doctor not tell him the bad news. What should you, as the doctor, do in this situation? In this scenario, the role I have as a physician is to decide whether I should listen to the parents and not disclose the prognosis to the patient or tell the truth. The first step I would take would be to collect information. It's important to know all the variables and remain non-judgmental before making a final decision. Starting with the parents, I will ask them why they do not want the patient to know about their prognosis. They might, for instance, think that hearing the prognosis will negatively influence their son's psychological well-being, which they will want to preserve as much as possible in his final days. From the patient's perspective, his main concern is to know the truth. To advance this inquiry, I will need to assess the child's maturity. In other words, I will have to be able to predict with reasonable accuracy how hearing the news will affect his psychological health. It isn't fair to assume that the child is incapable of processing the news just because his parents are averse to the prospect of him knowing or because he is young. To assess his maturity, I will ask him how he's feeling and what he thinks of his condition. It will be important to understand what he already knows before I decide if I should reveal other critical details. I have two available options: to go against the parent's wishes and tell the child, or to respect the parent's wishes. If my assessment of the child's maturity reveals that he can understand and appreciate a situation, then I would tell the child. It's important to reveal the truth to the child in this case, since the knowledge has health implications. While a physician should respect the wishes of the parents of children in a medical context, there are situations where siding with the child is obligatory, and their health is my primary concern. If upon my assessment of the child's maturity and ability to process his prognosis, the parents are still protesting, I will have a sit-down conversation with them to explain that it would be in the child's best interest to let them know and that it would factor into their overall well-being. I would also connect them to social support and counseling to help process the psychological, emotional, and practical aspects of the diagnosis. However, if it becomes apparent from my findings that the parents were right and the child cannot physically or emotionally or psychologically process his diagnosis, then I would respect their wishes in consultation with another senior physician. I would, however, suggest and connect them with social support and counseling who would find other means to convey the diagnosis to their child in a way their son can understand and process. To summarize, I would assess the child's capacity by asking questions about what he knows about health, probe the parents for information on why they think he shouldn't be told, and then based on this decision and this information, make a decision about revealing the prognosis to the child. Now, before we get into why this was a strong response, if you were following along with your stopwatches at home, you'll probably notice that the response that I read out didn't necessarily reach that potential 8-minute time limit that you'll have at MMI stations. If you are ever in the instance where you have finished your strong response, have all your thoughts laid out on the table, and you still have extra time, don't let that get to your head. Be comfortable sitting in silence and waiting until the buzzer goes off and it is time to leave the room. This is important to note because in a lot of cases, students will see the extra time as thinking that they have not answered the question fully. In this case, this is incorrect. We always recommend quality over quantity. It is very possible to formulate a strong response in 3 to 4 minutes, which may lead you a couple extra minutes left over in the station. In this case, like I said, get comfortable in that silence, make sure you don't ramble and add things just for the sake of filling time, as this may end up being detrimental to your overall response. Now let's get into why this was a strong response. So as you remember, as I went through the approach prior to the reading of the expert response, you'll notice that the interviewee in this case, whose response I read, checked all of the boxes. They identified the most pressing issue, which in this case was telling the truth to the son and the one with the terminal diagnosis. And they went and gathered information prior to giving any solutions. They spoke to the parents, and they also assessed the child's maturity to determine whether or not they should be giving the information regarding their prognosis. They then went through 3 different scenarios in the case of telling the child and when they would not tell the child. But in all cases, they took it a step further and made sure that everyone and all parties involved would have the proper support, in this case, such as counseling or additional support. With the response to this question, the candidate shows the interviewer that they are level-headed, mature, and have great problem-solving skills as they were able to tackle this scenario with ease. It is no wonder why this was a successful applicant. Do you want to learn how to tackle every MMI question type that's going to come your way? Take a look at what BeMo's MMI prep program has to offer at the link below. You can also find the link in the description of this video. You'll be paired with experts that will conduct mock interviews, you'll get real-time feedback, and tips that are specific to you to ensure that you crush every MMI during this medical school interview admission season. We can't wait to work with you and help you get accepted to your top choice medical school. Stay tuned for more videos just like this one, where we will go through samples, expert responses, and tips for various components of your application to medical school and residency. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so that you are in the know as soon as these videos are posted.